Hello, welcome to the interview here on France 24. Now, if you've been following the crisis playing out here in the Eurozone recently, in recent months, you've heard lots of talk about austerity and fiscal discipline. And you might, just maybe, are asking yourself, with all of this belt tightening going on everywhere, where is the recipe for growth now and in the future? Now, in the name of trimming deficits, you might well ask, is the cure that's being imposed worse than the disease? Well, my guest today has a bird's eye vantage on this entire crisis playing out in Europe, as well as its investment crisis, climate right now and in the future. Philippe Baudereau is a managing director at PIMCO. Now, if you haven't heard of it, that it's the world's largest bond buyer of debt, that is. And though it's based in California, you join me today, Philippe, from London. And this is where you basically are looking out over what's going on in Europe. And what we're seeing today, this week, we're hearing that a deal is near on for Greece, basically a debt deal, in which the private sector would essentially have to forgive a lot of the debts. Is this a good deal? Is there enough debt forgiveness, so to speak, in this deal?
Well, I think the private sector is probably going as far as it can. We're talking about effective haircuts that should range, probably higher than anywhere between 70 and 75%, which quite frankly is a default in all but name. The issue here is that even after this debt forgiveness from the private sector, you still don't bring Greece necessarily back on a sustainable path in terms of its debt to GDP dynamics. At best, it's going to be debt to after the PSI, it's going to be 120, 130% debt to GDP. In a country that's got very, very weak growth prospects, it's going to be in deep recession.
So
Could
I jump in for a second? Some people might suggest, why not forgive all the debt? Isn't that ultimately what's needed in order to really give Greece the breathing space it needs to perhaps at some point get back to growth?
So I think that private sector is not enough, and you're going to need to see some debt relief from the other creditors of Greece. And today, the other creditors of Greece are the official sector, the Troika, so a mixture of European Union loans, the ECB, which has been busy buying Greek bonds on the secondary market, and the IMF. We know that the IMF ranks senior to everybody else, so they will be the last, the most reluctant to accept any losses. But I think that the pressure will be building, has already started to build on the ECB and the European Union to provide some extra debt forgiveness in the next few months.
So not just the private sector, but the Troika, these institutions should also step up and also forgive some of this debt. I want to ask you about Germany. Germany, as Europe's largest economy, we know has been dictating largely the terms of how we solve this crisis. Fiscal discipline, belt tightening, austerity, has it gone too far?
Yeah. Well, I think so. I think that what's really lacking in Europe, there's a few things that are lacking, but I think that there isn't a growth strategy in Europe. What you are seeing is that even the countries that are growing reasonably well in Northern Europe, such as Germany, even those countries are going for belt tightening and fiscal discipline and austerity measures. Whilst at the same time you got extreme measures imposed on Southern Europe. So if everybody is tightening at the same time, everybody is going for austerity, including the countries that probably shouldn't. And in addition to that, you've got pro-cyclical regulatory issues that affect the banking system, which means that you've got a lot of private sector deleveraging at the same time as all this. Obviously, it's not good for growth, and you're seeing that many countries are heading back into recession.
Who is most exposed right now in terms of, if you had to choose a country whose banks are most exposed to, I guess, A, Greek debt, and then down the line, Italian and Spanish debt as well, who would it be?
Well, I think all these numbers are public and known, and we've been following them for quite a long time. It's pretty clear that the large banks in France and Germany are have got the biggest exposure to Southern Europe. Greece in itself, in isolation, isn't really a major issue, and the holdings of French and German banks and Greek government bonds are not very large, and you'll see that they've already taken 60% haircuts in the third quarter of last year. And so taking an extra 10, 15, or 20 isn't really making a big difference. The big issue is really the contagion and the systemic nature of the crisis rather than the direct exposures.
And we're still talking about this contagion. It has been a term since the very beginning of this crisis. At this point, have things calmed down a little bit, or are we just sort of the quiet before the next storm? Because we saw France's ratings downgraded recently. A lot was made about that. And since then, not that much. In fact, bonds have actually gone down a bit. So where do you see the market right now?
Well, I think you've seen some important actions taken by the ECB at the end of last year in the form of what they call the LTRO. And what the LTRO is really been the ECB providing a lot of 3-year liquidity to the banking sector across Europe under very generous conditions. So that's around 500 billion euros of that has been borrowed by the banks across Europe. And clearly that amount of liquidity put in the system has given some temporary respite.
Temporary? I'm sorry, but they haven't gone
temporary because
they haven't gone as far, though, as the Federal Reserve in the United States or the Bank of England in the UK.
They haven't gone as far as that, and that's the result of, I think, their own constraints and their mandates, and also the fact that, an important component is the Bundesbank, which has strong reluctance to embrace secondary bond purchases and QE type of quantitative easing type of programs that you've seen in the US or in the UK. So they certainly have been slower. But quite frankly, if you look at the balance sheet of the ECB today, it's actually bigger relative to GDP than the balance sheet of the Fed or the balance sheet of the Bank of England. They have made, because of their political constraints, it's been easier for them to provide a lot of liquidity to the banking system, and it's been much more difficult to do that towards governments. But yeah.
I'm sorry to cut you. No, I just want to jump in and just ask you, at the end of the day, though, is the reason perhaps that the markets haven't gone into a spiral, a downward spiral, is because most investors believe, whether it says so or not, the ECB at the end of the day will come in and do what's needed to keep things stable?
Well, and to be fair to them, they have done that. They've probably done that in a not very efficient way. I think the crisis didn't have to get as bad as it got to. I believe that the decisions such as inflicting losses on the private sector in Greece have been very costly for the entire Eurozone, and all these things were very unnecessary. But the ECB has been active in its support of the banks and fairly efficient in doing so. Because of their mandate and their political constraints, they are reluctant to engage into large-scale purchases of Italian and Spanish government bonds. But you can't say that they've been inactive. I think the level of inaction has been more on the fiscal side, on the government side, where you've seen constant bickering and very inefficient outcomes so far.
I know that your particular expertise is in the banking sector. You're not a politician, obviously, but I'm curious about your views. Do you think there is enough coordination on a government level right now, centralized coordination when it comes to budgetary decisions? Should we be seeing a lot more?
Well, no, I don't think there is enough coordination. I think that what should happen in Europe is that obviously you've got this big gap between Northern and Southern Europe. And Northern Europe has been growing quite well and should be in expansionary mode and provide some stimulus to the rest of the Eurozone, whilst clearly countries in Southern Europe need to find their path towards fiscal stability and budget stability.
There's no political will right now for anyone to provide that fiscal stimulus.
No, there isn't.
And this is now, just before we go, we're running out of time, but PIMCO, ultimately, you look at the banking sector. PIMCO, as I said at the beginning, is the largest bond buyer. I'm not assuming too much by saying Europe is not quite a great place to go buying bonds at this moment in time. Where do you buy your bonds?
Oh, there's a huge amount of uncertainty in Europe right now. That's an understatement. So I think it's fair to keep a cautious view of the Eurozone at this stage. You also had a big rally as well over the past months. So I think it's better to be, in our mind, to be in the US and to some extent in emerging markets.
So, and what about emerging markets? I just want to ask you, when your portfolios right now, are you branching out to, what percentage are weighted in, say, in Asia or in Latin America?
Well, we've been involved very heavily in emerging markets for a very long time, and we view that as a secular theme. That these are parts of the world that obviously offer better growth and much better fundamentals than the Western world. Having said that, we're also cognizant that when you do have episodes of systemic contagion, these are tough assets to own. So I think at this particular juncture, given the amount of uncertainty out there, probably US we would view as the best place to be right now.
Still the gold standard, despite it all. Philippe Boudreau, we're unfortunately going to have to leave it there. Joining us from the London office of PIMCO, world's largest bond buyer, US-based investment firm. Thank you very much for your time today, and sharing your thoughts on the Euro crisis as it tries yet again to find a solution to a problem that just doesn't seem to go away. Thanks to all of you for watching the interview here on France 24.